Welcome into episode 322 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined from Northern New Hampshire, Bridget Prue, up at the lake for Memorial Day weekend celebrations, and in Lowell, Massachusetts, weighing in at 200. No, I'm just kidding. Scott McLaughlin. Bridget, Scott.
If you knew his exact weight, that would be a little weird, but
Listen, who needs Winnipesaukee when you can spend the weekend in Lowell?
Yeah.
Both are on the water, right? I mean, you got the what's the river? Is it the Hudson River that goes through Lowell?
The Hudson River. It's the Merrimack.
Merrimack River. What's the Hudson River's in
New York.
Yeah, I know. Isn't there a Hudson River around here too? We got the Nashua River.
There is a Nashua River.
Merrimack River.
Isn't the Hudson River where they crash landed that plane and
Yeah, that was right down the street from me.
Well, needless to say, I'm not a huge expert in
geography,
in domestic rivers and geography.
We will be having the Skate Pod geography be as one of our summer episodes to fill time.
Mm-hmm. For sure. We get my mom on here. She's great at geography. I asked her what the biggest state was, and she said Mexico. So,
I won my school's geography bee in middle school. I got to go to regionals.
Why doesn't that surprise me?
I'm not surprised in the least, honestly, Scott. Okay. Maybe you can surprise us with an opening shift, Scott. Did you have a takeaway from the Scott's pops? Here we go. I don't know if people
We're
can see
not doing this, Bridget. We're not doing this. Too early. That is only for end of the episode nonsense.
If every time Brian says Scott, then I'm just gonna throw that on there.
and by the way, those listening in their car or at work probably have no idea that we're referring to the Scott's Pop logo that Bridget has on YouTube.
I turned into a graphic. You're welcome.
Yeah. So Bruins ownership spoke. Scott, why don't you take us away here?
Yeah. So Wednesday at TD Garden, we heard from Charlie Jacobs, Cam Neely, Don Sweeney, Jim Montgomery, their annual end of season press conference. Lot to get into. That's what we're going to do the bulk of today's episodes. But one of the most interesting things to me was Sweeney's comments about Jake DeBrusk. We had heard from DeBrusk on Sunday at the players' breakup day say that he was surprised that an extension hadn't gotten done yet, which made it sound like, hey, I'm interested. I want to stay, but they haven't really made a move. Like, that's how that came across. Well, Sweeney kind of pushed back on that when he was asked about it on Wednesday. He said, negotiations are a two-way street. We took an aggressive position with Jake, no different than other players that have chosen not to re-sign and explore. That's within his right, certainly at this time of the year. Do I see a path? Yeah, there's a path. I told him that at our exit meeting. He went on to say, I would prefer to have Jake DeBrusk on our team, but he has some opportunity in front of him that he may pursue otherwise. So Sweeney is taking the position of, hey, we tried, and it's DeBrusk who, has dragged this out and might be exploring the open market. Ultimately, listen, I don't know who's right. I don't know, who's telling truth, who's fibbing a bit. What it really sounds like to me is it's two sides playing the PR game and trying to kind of get ahead of what I'm starting to think is going to be a split. And I think they're both kind of trying to play the good guy and say, like, I want this to continue, but it's not really happening or hasn't happened yet. It's still possible something gets done before July 1st, but this increasingly to me sounds like DeBrusk is going to hit the open market and is probably going to leave.
Yeah, I think I took that away as well. And I do something about the way when DeBrusk talked about it, I believed him. And I think I don't think he was just doing it for PR. I think that something happened at some point during negotiations during the regular season, it sounds like. And by the way, if Sweeney took an aggressive approach, that doesn't necessarily mean he offered him what he wanted, or like, I don't take that to mean Sweeney offered him a lot of money. I take that to mean like, he was like, we really want you back. Here's $3 million. Like, you know what I mean? Like something that probably wasn't what was fair at first.
Well, or it's as simple as they just have different ideas of what's fair. Like maybe Sweeney comes in at 4.5 a year. And I think you can make a case like that's fair, right? DeBrusk makes $4 million now. He hasn't done a whole heck of a lot to deserve a huge raise. But DeBrusk might be looking at the market, see that, Owen Tippett got $6.2 million during this past season, and say, I'd more or less produce like he does, and think 2.2 million is the price. And that's just a big gap that's probably not going to get closed over the next month.
And also, Scott, what you said is true. Jake DeBrusk is making $4 million on his most recent contract. Last episode, when I talk about should he be making Brad Marchand money or Chris Kreider money at 6'1" or 6'5", and people will comment well, they signed those contracts at a different a long time ago. My point is he's making $4 million right now. So to your point, Scott, how do you justify a $2 million raise based off of his regular season performances? And that's not just coming from me. That's coming from the GM, Don Sweeney, who mentioned in this press conference that Jake DeBrusk elevated his game in the playoffs, signifying that there was a place to be elevated from in the regular season, which as a GM, you have to look at when you're trying to negotiate contracts. And I do think, Bridget, I don't know if Jake DeBrusk was intentionally trying to play any PR stunts or negotiation stunts with the media, but it sounds like Don Sweeney kind of did because Jake DeBrusk said he's surprised, and Don Sweeney wants to get ahead of it and say, look, I've been aggressive. It sounds like he came to him with probably a fair deal, and justifiably so. Jake DeBrusk wants the most money for himself, and that's the name of the game. There's nothing wrong with that. If Jake DeBrusk thinks he's worth more than what the Bruins are offering him, and he can go get it somewhere else, go for it. But it seems like the Bruins clearly aren't willing to go there, and hence why they might part ways, which is kind of what we've seen all along. And if Jake DeBrusk wanted to take $5 million, $5.5 million to be a Boston Bruin, I'm sure Don Sweeney is probably around that range. But if he wants $6+, that's where you're probably going to have some disagreement to the point where there's going to be a parting of ways potentially.
Yeah, and it kind of leads into my opening shift, which is if they do end up not signing Jake DeBrusk, that's another gap that you have in your top six. We already think they were short there anyway. So now you're looking at probably having to add two big pieces. Now you have that money to work with, obviously, now if that it's not going to him, if it doesn't go to him. But so my opening shift is based around some of the comments he made about being aggressive. And I saw it tweeted out, but then if you actually listen to the comments, it was kind of like, we're going to be aggressive this offseason with the cap space that we have. But then it was to fill in secondary scoring. And to me, those two things are different. I didn't take his comments as super aggressive. Like if you just read into the first part of it, what it sounded like, he said, we're going to be aggressive to complement what we currently have. But to me, I think they need to add primary scoring besides Pasternak. Like they need to add somebody that can score more. Clearly in the playoffs, they had an issue with that. They didn't, they had trouble scoring, especially on the power play too, which they addressed. They said they need to maybe make some personnel changes on the power play as well. So to me, I think that you need to be aggressive. There's no excuse for you not to be aggressive with the cap space that you have this year. And I'm just worried that they still might think Zacha and Coyle are the top two centers, and that stops them from going out and targeting a first or second line center.
For me, one of my takeaways was a question directed at the Bruins brass from Kevin Paul DuPont, where he said to Charlie Jacobs, the team has lost in the first or second round in 5 consecutive seasons. Based on Charlie Jacobs opening the press conference that there's going to be no major personnel change at president, GM, or coach, Kevin Paul DuPont was asking, if that's the case, what's going to change to get over the hump of second round playoffs and beyond? And I don't think Kevin Paul DuPont was asking Charlie Jacobs when are they on the hot seat? Why aren't they on the hot seat? I think he was genuinely asking, okay, so if that's the case, what can change? And Charlie Jacobs responded saying, well, we did change a coach in that time frame, right? Jim Montgomery came in for Bruce Cassidy during that 5-year sample. And so I guess, I don't know if people think Don Sweeney or Cam Neely should have been on the hot seat after this season. I certainly don't think so at all. I think
we got a few callers that did, but we didn't really agree with them.
Oh, look, and I think we need to break it. So let's look at it from a macro perspective. Since Don Sweeney has been GM of the Boston Bruins have the best record in the National Hockey League. 383 wins, 163 losses, 72 overtime losses. So they have the best record in the regular season in the league since Don Sweeney has been GM. Now, there could be a lot of listeners who say, well, that's just classic Bruins. They've always been regular season darlings back to the Harry Sinden days, and that's their MO. Ownership just wants playoff gates, and they don't really care about winning. But, and I don't dismiss that narrative, and I don't dismiss it certainly back in the Harry Sinden days. But current day, the Jacobs, they spent to the cap. And Don Sweeney is a GM who, through all his mistakes and triumphs, the Bruins have been a very good regular season team and oftentimes have faltered in the playoffs, but not necessarily because of Don Sweeney. Like, I think the 22-23 season was a complete failure on the players and on the coaching staff. That was absolutely a championship roster on paper, and that's all a general manager can really do. This past season, the Bruins weren't able to construct a championship roster on paper due to the fact that they went all in the year before. And yes, they had to pay bonus overages this year to Bergeron and Krejci. It was a cost of going all in, and the players failed last year. And so Don Sweeney made chicken soup out of chicken shit with little no cap space, playing Moneyball, and the Bruins won a round, and here we are. So he shouldn't be fired based off of this past season. He shouldn't be fired based off of the year before. Charlie Jacobs mentioned that this team hasn't reached their ceiling yet. I think the Bruins organization, man to man, man to woman, everybody in that organization knows that the Bruins roster on paper this year was never going to win a Stanley Cup. And now they have an opportunity to go back out, spend in some areas, make some trades. Bridget and Scott, now does the clock start ticking on Sweeney and Neely as it pertains to playoff success going forward? Because eventually the dam does have to break. So I don't think they should be in the hot seat till this point, but going forward, I do think it's fair to, have pressure on them with playoff success riding on their success.
Yeah, I definitely think that the clock is starting, because to your point, like last year, Don Sweeney, with the help of Cam Neely, put together a roster that I think everyone agrees was good enough to win a Stanley Cup. And it didn't happen, but that wasn't on Sweeney for the roster building. So you knew this year was going to be a transition. You knew there was some resetting. There had to be some penny pinching for all the cap reasons we've talked about. And as we said, like, there's stuff within that you can critique and criticize if you want. Like, if you want to say they should have traded Ullmark earlier or should have made a salary dump, whether it was Grizzly or Forbort or someone else, like, I'm open to all of that, but I don't think any of that's like a fireable offense. So, okay, so you got through this year. Now you have the cap space. And now, like, what this year should have made clear is that this isn't a multi-year transition or reset. You don't need 2, 3, 4 years for your next core to emerge or whatever the case might be. Like, you have a team that made it to the final 8 with some pretty glaring holes. So go out and do your best to plug those holes, and you should have a cup contender again. That doesn't mean it's cup or bust next year, right? Like, doesn't mean if they don't win the cup next year, Sweeney's gone or Neely's gone or both. But it means you need to see signs that this team from this season through next season has taken a sizable step towards being a more legitimate cup contender. And how that looks, or like how it plays out in terms of how far they go and all that, like that remains to be seen. That's a conversation we'll have throughout next season, but that process starts now. And so that's why, if you're Charlie Jacobs, like you should sit there and say, like, okay, Don, like you said it, you're going to be aggressive. Now let's see it. Like you have the cap space. We've never put any internal cap on you. You can spend to the cap. So let's go use it and use it the right way and, fill the holes that this team has.
Yeah. And I was going to say, which means you have to be aggressive this offseason, and you can't just add some middle six forwards, and you need to add a big name this offseason. We knew they didn't have the ability to really do that last year, but this is different. And it's just so obvious that if he goes with, and I don't think he will, like he's a very intelligent GM, hence why the record is what it is. What Brian just listed off a few minutes ago, he knows what he has to do. I think maybe some of the comments that I was talking about when he said we want to be aggressive and complimenting what we have already. Like obviously he means the core. He means Pasta, Marchand, McAvoy, Carl. I think he means that as his core, and I think you probably put Swayman in there as well now. But I think that maybe he's just setting the bar lower publicly than what he's actually intending to do. I think he knows he needs to add a big difference maker on offense that can help you out on the power play too. So, and it's within reach. Obviously, he's not going to try to overspend. But I think he doesn't have any excuses to not do that this year, because he's going to have cap, especially if DeBrusk's gone. Then he's going to also be tasked with filling in for that scoring, which we mentioned wasn't so super consistent during the regular season, but it was during the playoffs. So he's going to have to find someone that comes in and produces in the playoffs too. And we won't know that obviously until the end of next year. It's a long ways off, but, he doesn't really have an excuse to not do it. So yes, that means the clock is ticking from this offseason on to put together the best roster he possibly can with the extra cap that he didn't have last year.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you said like there's no excuses and not to rebuild any in, but as I've said, like building through free agency is hard, and you can look at the list right now and be like, oh, I want that guy and that guy. There is still over a month to go before free agency starts, and not all those guys on every list that we're all looking at is going to make it to the open market. And it's possible that none of the names at the top make it. Like
it's also possible to trade for someone.
Yes, and that's what I was going to get to next. Is that's where like moving Ullmark becomes important, and you do still have to maximize. We all think he's going to try to trade Linus Ullmark. He was asked about that obviously on Wednesday as well, and said in a perfect world he'd like to keep the tandem together, but acknowledged that he's going to basically explore every option. He said, my phone will be ringing, I'll be making calls. The reality is, like, when he says in a perfect world, the unspoken part of that is he knows he's not in a perfect world because there's a salary cap. And so you can't have $12-13 million tied up in goaltending. So I do think he's going to trade Ullmark, but this is where it also becomes important to still try to maximize what you get in return. Like I said last year, leading up to the deadline, like it's not just a salary dump for me, because if you are going to have to acquire your impact forward or your number one center by trade, you need assets to do that. And right now you are very thin on assets. So I don't know if you can get a first round pick for Ullmark. I kind of doubt it, but you got to get something that helps you turn around and go make another trade to land an impact player, whether it's a second, whether it's a higher end prospect, whether it's multiple picks. Maybe it's even a hockey trade. Like maybe Ullmark is part of the package that helps you land impact forward X. So that is another key part of it, because just doing it through free agency might be how they go about this. but that might also end up not being as viable a path as we think it is right now.
So let's keep it to Ullmark briefly, because also in the press conference, Ty Anderson he asked a question to Don about the possibility of having $12-13 million tied up in cap space amongst goaltenders, and if that can be difficult when trying to, add elsewhere on the roster. And Don kind of had a snarky response about Ty doing reverse engineering and doing Swayman's negotiations for him. But obviously what Ty suggested is pretty much in the ballpark. So I don't really.
Yeah, that was kind of a
thing.
weird. Yeah, that was kind of weird. It's like, what do you think? Were you gonna pay Swayman $3 million? Like, what the hell contract do you think he's gonna get?
Right. It's like we can all look at the list on Cap Friendly of the top 8 goalies and figure out where, like, at least the neighborhood where Swayman's gonna be.
Yeah.
So anyway, like, yeah, you mentioned it, Scott. In a perfect world, Sweeney would like to have the best tandem. We really don't think it's going to happen. And I think June is probably the time to look at, right? It's ahead of free agency, but it's the draft. And Don Sweeney mentioned in the press conference that, because it was asked to him, why is it that number one goalies never seem to get much of a return when traded? And Sweeney said, well, I don't know if I agree with that. I've seen a goalie go for a 9th overall pick in the draft before. We looked it up before this podcast. It was Corey Schneider going from Vancouver to, was it New Jersey, maybe?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And for the 9th overall pick, and the Canucks turned that 9th overall pick into Bo Horvat, who ended up being their future captain now with the Islanders. And Don Sweeney also mentioned that the goalie market, you can't look at history, because it just depends on the current landscape of the NHL and what's the supply and demand right now in the league. So we don't know the 15 or 16 teams that are not on Ullmark's no trade list, but of the teams that Ullmark is willing to go to, Bridget, Scott, there's got to be a team that needs a goalie in those 15 that might be willing to part with a first or second rounder. There has to be, no?
Could you try it with New Jersey again? It worked out okay for Vancouver.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, they need a goalie.
Yeah.
So
Let's see, what pick do they have this year?
Yeah, I think New Jersey is definitely one of the teams who's going to be in. Even in more recent history than Schneider, like, to the point that it does all depend on the market, or just takes one team. Marc-Andre Fleury went for a first-round pick a couple years ago. Minnesota gave up a first to get him. Colorado gave up a first-round pick to get Darcy Kemper because they were so desperate for a goalie. They knew they were a goalie away, and obviously they did win the cup with Kemper. He wasn't exactly spectacular during that run, and they've moved on from him since. But yeah, like, all it takes is one team like that. Like, if Stuart Skinner shits the bed again in this Western Conference Finals, like, Edmonton might be that desperate team, or someone. The Kings are looking for a goalie and they feel like they're close. Like, it now again, like, there's Ullmark's no trade to work around and all that. I get it, but it just takes one, or it just takes a few teams to get into like a mini bidding war, and someone decides, like, okay, we're going to be the team that pushes it over because we've identified Linus Ullmark as the goalie we need.
If the Oilers are not on his no trade list, that seems like a really, based on what you said, Scott, like, if they make it all the way to the final and lose because of goaltending, that's a desperate move. Like, you move off of a high, you move off of a first round pick for the one fix that you need to try to make your team better for, or that you wish you had done sooner so that you could have won. Yeah, that's definitely a team, the Oilers, and we obviously don't know if they're on the no trade list, but if LA was the team that Don Sweeney was trying to move Ullmark to earlier, then we know that they're probably on his no trade list. So there's potential that's not an option.
Also, Colorado themselves again. Like, anyone who watched Alexander Georgiev in these playoffs, I think, should realize he's not the answer either for a cup contending team.
I'm looking at Cap Friendly, and I'm looking at the free agent class this year. And there is so many Skate Pod episodes to go until July. And there's so much that needs to unfold to even within the Bruins organization to even play this game right now. Right.
Yeah, but you got a big smirk on your face, so I want to know what you're thinking.
Well, I have this weird. I'm looking at one name, and I again, the Bruins have to potentially re-sign Jake DeBrusk. They gotta re-sign Jeremy Swayman. You got to see if you can get some cap alleviation with Linus Ullmark. There's a lot that has to be figured out financially and logistically right now before they even hit free agency potentially. But I feel like, and we also all agree that they're clearly going to try and they're going to get a top 2 center somehow, some way they will, whether it's free agency or trade. It's going to happen. There's no way they're going back with Koil Zaka. It's just not happening. I don't know how they're going to do it, but they're going to get a top 2 center somehow. But there's one name on this free agency list that I feel like is going to be a Boston Bruin. I don't know how anything else that I just mentioned is going to shake out, but I do feel like, and mark this tape, I feel like Jonathan Marchesseault is going to end up being a Boston Bruin next year. And I don't know why. There's literally not one good reason I can give you other than it's kind of a gut instinct. I feel like he's going to be a Boston Bruin. Vegas is completely up against it. I don't think they have the money. The Bruins do have the money to compete with the top teams willing to spend on him. He's got championship pedigree. Yes, he's 33, but that's still back half of one's prime, I think. I could see him being a potential fit that the Bruins try to go after. There's a lot to figure out. They got to get a top 2 center, but I feel like I could see him in a Bruins sweater next year.
They need playoff scoring, and Jonathan Marchesseault is the guy who was the MVP of the Stanley Cup winning team that Vegas had. So
he's very sneakily kind of going under the radar here because the big names are going to be Sam Reinhart and why am I blanking on his name?
Gensel.
Jake Gensel, Sam Reinhart. You got Bertuzzi in there. You got some others in there. Stamkos.
Elias Lindholm, obviously.
Lindholm. Yeah. So I can just see him kind of being not at the forefront of people's minds necessarily. I could see
that's actually who on that list I like the most in terms of what they need. Obviously Reinhart is probably the best on that list, but if we're being realistic, Marchesseault makes sense, I think. So I like him. I agree with Brian. If he was a Bruin, I think that would be a big help. And I think that it's not going to be as big of a bidding war over him as someone like Jake Gensel and Sam Reinhart. And Scott, you've mentioned this before on other podcasts or on Sunday Skate that you think Reinhart's signing with Florida and doesn't reach the open market anyway.
I mean, I think he wants to stay. I think Florida wants to keep him, and they have some cap space. They'll have to figure out some other stuff, but yeah, I feel like that makes too much sense for him to end up staying. Marchesseault makes a lot of sense for all the reasons you guys laid out. Proven scorer, has done in the playoffs, and also he's probably more likely than those guys to actually get to the market because Vegas does not have cap space. I think currently they have 800,000 in cap space, which is a really tough place to start an off season. If they're going to have to shed guys off their current roster just to fill in the rest of the team, never mind re-signing anyone, they have a bunch of restricted free agents too, who need contracts. I know there's a lot of talk about them potentially trading Shea Theodore, that maybe being their big cap clearing move. Everyone there has said they want to keep Marchesseault. He's one of the original Golden Knights. He's their all-time leading scorer. He said he wants to stay, but they've let it get to this point. They've brought in other big money players this season in Tomas Hertl and Noah Hannafin, and already extended Hannafin. It sort of feels like the writing's on the wall. If you really wanted to keep Marchesseault, you probably would have already done it. You probably wouldn't let someone like that get to the open market. So I think he's going to be out there.
I think he'd culturally be a good fit, just based off what not that I know a whole lot, but he's somebody that came in undrafted and has been able to put this career together just by working really hard. And I think that he just seems like somebody that would be pretty complimentary to the group they already have and the culture they already have.
Yeah, for sure. The one not drawback, but the one. So I guess I'll bring this up now. Cam Neely yesterday said the Bruins aren't as fast as he'd like them to be, and he said they need to get faster. So immediately I start thinking of okay, well, who's available that is fast? Who adds an element of speed? Oddly enough, Jake DeBrusk obviously brings speed, and it seems like he's going to be gone probably. So I was thinking well, then do you replace him with another speed guy? And that's not Marchesseault. His game's never been speed. In that sense, that's also maybe a reason to feel like you're not as worried about signing him into his mid or possibly even late 30s, depending on what that contract looks like. Is, he's never been a burner. So if his speed drops a little, it's well, that's not really his game anyways. But it did make me think do Neely and Sweeney want burners? Do they think they need more guys who, can beat defensemen with speed?
I mean,
or get in on the forecheck with speed.
A couple of guys that are free agents that could present speed. Not that they're perfect players by any stretch, but Kasperi Kapanen has speed. Anthony Duclair has speed, and Chandler Stevenson is a center left wing who has some good speed. So there are guys further down the list where if DeBrusk doesn't work out, there's some opportunity there to have some players a little bit further down the free agency list. And again, I think, like I've said before, I think in a perfect world, I think the Bruins do find a way to sign DeBrusk for an appropriate value, and he is still on your second line or maybe your third line, depending on if you have just too much depth up front. But if he decides to go test the waters and go somewhere else, then yeah, they're gonna have to get creative. Find some more speed.
Can I throw another name out that I started thinking of? Someone tweeted at me, so I commented about it on Twitter Wednesday night. A restricted free agent, Martin Necas, who there's been a lot of rumors that he's possibly unhappy in Carolina. He wants to be higher in the lineup. He wants more power play opportunity. Carolina has a ton of unrestricted and restricted free agents. They're not going to be able to keep everyone. So there's been some thinking that he might be one of the ones that they move on from and, trade his rights away. He certainly brings speed. He's one of the fastest skaters in the NHL. Has, I would say, been a good second line producer. I don't think he's hit first line level of production. He was drafted as a center. He's been almost exclusively a wing in Carolina. So, if you're the Bruins, that would be a player, in his prime. I think he's 25 going on 26. That would make a lot of sense to me. Especially
which actually he's younger than DeBrusk, because DeBrusk I think is 28. So
especially if you think there's even a possibility that there's still a future at center there. I don't know if there is or isn't. I honestly haven't dove deep enough into his game or talked to people about that. So
Zacha, it could be a similar situation to Zacha, where he was mostly a wing for New Jersey and then came back and started getting more reps at center, and now he's mostly a set. Well, not in the playoffs, but for most of the season he was a center. So maybe some of the resentment comes from Necas' side because maybe he wants to be a center. Who knows? We would have to maybe we'll get Sarah Sivian on.
I will
she
say,
would know.
I do find it a little telling that the Hurricanes have needed a number 2 center for years, and they've really never tried him there. And it's they tried Jesperi Kotkaniemi there. He wasn't good enough. They tried Jordan Staal there. He's really a third liner. They trade for Evgeny Kuznetsov. So it's like they've tried every solution other than playing Necas at center.
And Rob Brind'Amour. Yeah, Rob Brind'Amour is no dummy either. So yeah, he would have if he thought it would work. It's not like a situation where you're like, I don't know why they didn't try. Like Rod Brittenmore is smart enough to have a good idea of where to put people best. So yeah, that's an interesting one because it's restricted free agent. So
okay. So was there any other final takeaways from the management and ownership speaking?
Well, there was one interesting thing. Well, it could be nothing, but what he said about Zacha, what Sweeney said about Zacha and Coyle. Basically, he was saying they stepped up, and we need to compliment them. Like he was saying that people on the outside, maybe talking about media, maybe talking about fans, said that Zacha and Coyle were not a good 1 and 2, like good options for your top 2 centers. But he put his backing behind them in this press conference and said they stepped up and did what he wanted them to do. So I don't know if that is, how to take that. Maybe it means he's not going to add a center. I'm just nervous he's going to miss out on some and a way to make the team better if he thinks those 2 are the answer.
I mean, he can say whatever he wants, but you also have to face the reality of in the playoffs, Zacha got moved to wing and then he got moved down to the 3rd line. So, like, how can you possibly sit there and be like, oh, yeah, no, he can be our number 1 center of the future? Like, no, you just saw in the playoffs, like, it didn't work. So, I don't expect him to rip players or be like, oh, yeah, we have come to the conclusion that Pavel Zacha is not a number 1 center. Like, he's not going to say that, but actions speak louder than words. And, like, your coach is sitting right next to you, thinking like, I couldn't use him as my number 1 center in the playoffs. Like I couldn't use him as David Pasternak's center. So
yeah,
ultimately, like that has to be addressed. Like you can't just be like, well, maybe next year will be better. Like no, I think there's not a number 1 center on this roster. Just about every Stanley Cup winner has a legit number 1 center. So he can say whatever he wants, but like it would really be a major failure or kind of like head buried in the sand moment if he thinks they can just run this back at center and reinsert Patra, who, might develop into a top 2 center as the years go on. But like, I still think it'd be really unfair to expect him to be that next season.
Yeah, and the comments that they did have about Patra were kind of weird. It was like, so they were asked about surprises that they had this year, and they were talking about how Lohrei and Beecher were good surprises, that Beecher made it out of camp and that Lohrei took a job, and they didn't really bring up Patra in that portion. And then a little bit later they said Cam Neely, sorry.
Neely who was talking
yes, it was Cam Neely. I should have specified that. And then a little bit later, I think was it also Cam Neely that was talking about Patra as needing to re-earn his job?
Sweeney was talking.
Yeah.
About
Okay.
that.
Yeah. So basically, and obviously everybody has to earn their job in camp. Beecher's going to be, fighting for. There's going to be a lot of potential 4th liners fighting for that role. But yeah, they're talking about how Patra kind of needs to re-emerge after what we saw him do last year. He got off to such a great start, had the injury set him back, and they're hoping that out of camp he does the same thing as he did last year, I think. But banking on him being a solution there it seems like now that you have the cap space, you shouldn't just be throwing like a Hail Mary pass with your 20-year-old that happened to be like almost a happy accident that he was as good as he was, as quick as he was. So you have the ability to get a more surefire number 1 center, and then maybe throw Patra in 2nd line or 3rd line, wherever he seems to fit best once he's healthy.
Another takeaway that I had was talking about Brad Marchand. Sweeney was asked about him having 1 year left, I think, on his contract. And, the vibe I got essentially is re-signing Brad Marchand is the least of the Bruins' worries, and that when the time comes, he's just going to take that team-friendly discount all the way through the end of his career, it sounds like. And in the meantime, he's going to try to recruit best way he can. He's going to try to convince players around him, teammates around him, to try to take the best deals that they can for the betterment of the team. It just, that's the vibe that I got from it. And obviously the Bruins paid Charlie McAvoy, David Pastrnak what they were worth. But from here on out, I think Brad Marchand has a role to play. He's a bit of a politician, I think, as a player for the front office and for the betterment of the team and organization. I don't know if you guys have any concerns about him not being a Bruin or taking the Bruins to every dollar that they can give him. But I think he's just learning from the leaders in front of him.
Yeah, for sure. I think he feels like he's probably going to follow in the footsteps of Zdeno Chara and Patrice Bergeron, which is, as you get older, as you get off that biggest contract of your career, you play ball with the team. And I think Chara and Bergeron did that because they wanted to, and they felt like that was the best way they could continue to lead and build, hopefully a cup team. Obviously, those two did not win another cup late in their careers, but I think Marchand wants to, and I think he's going to take that same kind of approach.
And he's taken that approach his whole career, by the way. He's never gotten, Brad Marchand, not so much right now, but over the last 10 years, for the majority of the last decade, has been a top 3 left wing in hockey, and at an absolute bargain price, pretty much. Outside of Alex Ovechkin, and I have to go through over the years, but Marchand's been up there, and he hasn't made what he's probably earned. So, but at this point, whatever, sounds like he's going to keep doing it. So good for him, I guess. A leader, maybe a little too much of a leader, but yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately for him, he never really got that truly amazing payday because he signed his big contract, 8 years, $49 million, so $6.125 million. So that contract is running through this upcoming season. So it kicked in the 2017-18 season, but it was actually signed a year out. It was signed September 2016. And at that point, he had just had his first 30-goal, 60-point season. That next season, before the contract even kicks in, that's when he puts up 39 goals, 85 points. So it's like, had he waited, he definitely would have been able to get more. I don't think he's hurting. I don't think Brad Marchand wants anyone to feel bad for him that he never got to make $7 million plus. But from the Bruins' perspective, boy, did they time that just right to get him on that extension.
Can I ask you guys a question? Just jumping back real quick to the top one, number one center priority for the Bruins. Earlier in the podcast, I mentioned how, I don't know how, but they're going to have to acquire a top center. And I just genuinely don't know how they're going to do it, because you look at the free agency and you see Stamkos and you see Elias Lindholm. And if it's not one of those guys, you do kind of question who's it going to be, because they're not going to run it back with Coyle and Zacha, right? So have you guys even thought that far ahead? If it's not Stamkos, if it's not Lindholm, which it probably won't be Stamkos, and they'll be one of probably many bidders for Lindholm. Do they take a chance on a Chandler Stevenson who's got, coming off a 51-point season, but not a top center?
Right, he's clearly not a number one. Ideally, he's a third line center, I think, or
right,
maybe a top 6 wing.
But what I'm saying is, will they be in a situation where they don't have a choice besides try to take another chance on somebody who's not a top center? If it's
they
not,
better
Stamkos,
not be.
Who's it going to be though? Is it a hockey trade we're not thinking of?
Yeah, probably.
It definitely could be.
Sometimes there's guys that are not happy where they are, and we just don't publicly really know that, or somebody wants out, or a team might not find somebody to be their perfect fit, or maybe the Bruins have something they want. So yeah, there's plenty of stuff that that's just not on our radar right now. But that I'm sure Don Sweeney is making as many calls as he can to try to track down if anyone has a reasonable price for somebody that he'd be interested in at center.
Yeah, and as we get more into this offseason, and
I told you I want to do a whole episode on it. We need a whole
I think
episode.
like we'll hear some rumors, and I admittedly haven't gone through every team and like analyzed all their situations yet to try to find that guy that they could potentially pluck out. But like it's possible there's not anything, but usually there's at least like an option that emerges somewhere. So I want to bring up, I don't know if you guys saw this, but Fluto wrote a story for The Athletic on the possibility of basically punting on a big money center this offseason again and holding out for the possibility that Leon Draisaitl, who has 1 year left on his contract, winds up being available. And going
that sounds very
all in on that.
That sounds insane.
It does. That was
because
also my take.
Every other team is going to be like on the same exact mindset. Anybody that has like, so basically you're supposed to be bad this year, leave as much cap space open as you possibly can, and then try to, I don't know. I mean, everybody loves Draisaitl and for a good reason, but that sounds like they'd be having to look and like take a step back this upcoming season to do that. I don't know. I feel like that's incredibly risky.
Let's bring, was it Butchie who had the, remember we discussed, I think it was like early on this year, the crazy package of like Ullmark. Yes. It was like Ullmark, Patra first. There might have been like Lori in there. Like it was a ton of stuff. Let's bring that back. I'm in.
Yeah, Patra was in there, and then like I'll see if I can find it. But yeah, no, that was a crazy deal. But that would be a trade, not? Didn't you say he's going to be a free agent? Like you're much more likely to get him in a trade than you are as a free agent. There's going to be so much bidding. That's crazy.
And that's also like obviously if the Oilers don't just keep him, which is still, it would be hard for me to imagine them not locking up Leon Draisaitl, but I guess anything's possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really tough sell to go a whole regular season again for the second consecutive year without a true number one center, with the hope of signing one of the biggest free agents probably in recent memory, right? I mean, the situation, I mean, could, depending on the season's still going on for the Oilers, but I mean, that trade proposal you just bring up, Scott, kind of tongue in cheek, kind of serious. Like, would you make that trade a year ahead of him hitting the open market, with knowing that you still have to kind of sign him later? So that, you know, I would, yeah, I would probably give up those assets for 1 year at least of Draisaitl, knowing you could probably try to re-sign him, right? But
yeah, like, extend immediately.
I don't know what the limit is, but like if it's starting at Ullmark, Patra first round pick, like I'm good with that. And then it's how much more are you adding on top of that? Like I think I'm still willing to add on, you know, another couple assets. Like,
for some reason, I feel like that trade included Frederick or something like that.
It might have. I'm fine with that. Throw him in. Like,
yeah,
I've said it before, but like I'm a massive fan of Leon Draisaitl.
Yeah.
Like he's a complete player. He's an absolute force. He produces in the playoffs every year. Like there's,
he's insane.
You would have to get very, very high in terms of what you're giving up before I'd be like, "Ooh, no, that's too much."
Your second best forward would be David Pastrnak.
Mm-hmm.
What's that tell you about the player? So that, I mean, and look, honestly, that's the beauty of sports. It kind of, fate has to play out still. I think it kind of, the opportunity to trade for Leon Draisaitl before his contract is up in Edmonton, I think has a lot to do with how this season plays out for Edmonton. They're a Final Four team. They're at the Western Conference Finals again for I think the second time in 2 or 3 years. And it didn't go well the first time. They got spanked around by the Avalanche and route to their Stanley Cup championship. If the Oilers go out and beat Dallas and go to the Stanley Cup Finals and come just short or win or whatever, or they go to the conference finals and lose to Dallas in 7, you're probably like not willing to necessarily hear that easily on Draisaitl. But say the Dallas Stars sweep the Oilers in 4, or a gentleman sweep them in 5, and maybe Edmonton's like, you know what? Maybe we've seen the best of what we can get with Draisaitl and McDavid. Let's get the most for Draisaitl while we can, whether that's the Bruins or somebody else, right? So I think
letting
Oilers
him walk
ends,
seems like a really bad freaking idea. Letting him walk for nothing.
Yeah.
That's not probably anything they'd be willing to do.
So it depends how their season ends this year. It might end in a way where it leaves a really bad taste, a really sour taste in management's mouth, and exactly, Bridget, they want to optimize him while they can. Maybe they're like, all right, we've had him and McDavid for almost a decade here, and we haven't gotten close to the cup. We're gonna hedge that on one final year with them for a last dance with them, or should we just try to get something for him now?
What, since we're already so far down this road and now my mind's going, what if the Oilers say, you know what, we do want a goalie, but it's not Linus Ullmark we want Jeremy Swayman?
Oh yeah, I think you gotta send them. You gotta send them. I mean, hey, you still got Ullmark for a year, right? And the Bruins have some promising goalies down in Providence. It's the last thing I want to do. But if the return is Leon Draisaitl, yeah, I think you got to really consider that, especially because you have Ullmark, right? Oh, they got the best goalies in the league.
Well, and Swayman doesn't have a no trade clause yet. But Ullmark has a limited, and maybe Oilers are not a team that they're a team that he would block a trade to. So
yeah,
maybe your only option would be Swayman, and it would not be Ullmark.
I Edmonton closer to Alaska than Boston is.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Bridget. I don't think. I mean, Ullmark would have to waive, because I guarantee Edmonton's on his no trade list. Based off what we talked about a few months back, guys, I run the trade deadline. I'm willing to bet a lot of the teams in his no trade clause are out west.
Yeah,
it's probably past Minnesota and Chicago, anywhere west of those areas, because of the time difference with being close to you don't want, you're already 6 hours behind his homeland of Sweden. I don't know if he wants to be 12, right, or 9. So
math.
But anyway, lots of time to discuss all this, so I guess we'll put a pin in it for now. Any final discussion points before we go for the holiday weekend here? On
Swayman, because it just jogged my memory, I find it interesting that Sweeney, once again, when he's asked about going to arbitration last year, points out, hey, just for the record, he took us to arbitration, not the other way around.
Which is BS.
Well, no, it's not. It's
it's BS. It's true, but it's BS because there's a reason why he took you to arbitration. The money was not fair, and he obviously wasn't going to take that deal.
I would like to know what was on the table and how much more Swayman got by going arbitration, because I bet it's not more than $500,000 or $600,000.
I don't know,
but
I know I thought that their bids were pretty far apart.
Yeah, but that's different than what? That's different than where they were in negotiations. You have to file at those numbers because you have to over exaggerate that going into the hearing. So I think the Bruins filed at 2 or 2.1 or something, but that doesn't mean that was their best offer to Swayman. I guarantee it wasn't. But I found that interesting, and I also do think it's worth noting, because I think a lot of fans think it is the other way around, and it's also why at times it rubbed me the wrong way when Swayman would bring it up, because it's well, you could have avoided that. I'm not blaming Swayman at all for going to arbitration. It's well within his rights, and that's fine. But then to kind of play the woe is me card of awful.
No, I disagree with you about this, because I think that he was insulted. And that's like, he was insulted by the original offer, clearly thought he could get more, and not because he wanted more being greedy, like because he knew he deserved more. And when someone tells you you're not, like, your value is X and you don't believe that, that makes, there's hard feelings there. So I understand why he wanted to go to arbitration. I understand why he was upset with the process and it continuing to be sounding like, okay, this guy's not worth anything. This guy's, and he would, I mean, he should get as much as he deserves again. They should have probably been willing to come to terms before arbitration last year too. I don't know. I don't blame Swayman for it, even though he's the one who filed for it. We all know that Swayman was not supposed to be getting paid like a backup. Your traditional backup.
First off, he wasn't. He was getting paid like a rotational goalie, and
but
at that point, that's if we're being real about this, like that's all he had been. He hadn't proven himself as the number one last summer.
No, he was. What they were offering him was not what he was worth.
Yeah, but like they had to play hardball because they had no cap space.
And I could see. I understand why he wasn't happy.
My thing is, like, I think how last summer played out makes total sense from everyone's perspective. Like, I get why both sides ended up where they did and why they couldn't budge more. It just always kind of rubbed me the wrong way that like Swayman, would bring it up out of the blue when he's talking about making his first All-Star game. And it's like, yeah, dude, like you knew arbitration was going to suck. It sucks for everyone. Like, hey,
sometimes the trauma shows through, sometimes it gets out. I went on a first date recently where I was like, you're not still with your ex-girlfriend, right? And I was like, I should not have said that. Like he just brings it up out of nowhere because he's worried about it. So sometimes it happens. Sometimes it just sneaks out.
Right.
No comments.
I'm sure there'll be enough on YouTube. We don't have to comment, so we won't go there.
Just remember, Bridget, you brought that up.
Same time as Swayman. See, that's what I'm saying. That's my point. Sometimes you bring it up on accident, and you didn't mean to say it. So,
all right, Bridget. Well, your lake cabin looks like it's waiting for you, and the lake's waiting for you, and we all know Scott's got to go.
Swim in the Hudson River.
Yeah, the Hudson River there in Lowell, Massachusetts. Go Lock Monsters. Anyway, by the way, speaking of Lowell, what's the latest with the PWHL Championship Series?
So they are headed to Minnesota. Series is tied 1-1, and it's best of 5. So if people are wondering if they hadn't heard, best of 5. Boston won the first game. Minnesota won the second game. They had a controversial review, just like the Bruins playoffs had one. But yeah, they're still in good position to win, I think. I think they have a really good team. They got a really good goalie. They didn't quite get they didn't have the best luck in game 2 for sure. The goal that they scored got called back because I guess not everybody heard it. I personally didn't hear it. There was either the whistle blew or there was an intent to blow the whistle, so goal didn't count. But yeah, their next 2 games are in Minnesota. If they split those, they'll come back to Boston for game 5 because Boston's the higher seed.
But next game's Friday night?
Lowell. Sorry, to Lowell. But you know what I mean. Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Very good.
On quickly on the topic of other series, we're recording this. What's today? Thursday. Every day blends together now. Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals was last night. Panthers beat the Rangers, and my only comment on that is the Rangers playing against the Panthers looked a lot like the Bruins. Couldn't generate much at all in terms of offense. We're spending a lot of time in their own zone. End up getting shut out, which, hey, the Bruins couldn't score, but at least they never got shut out in that series. But it looked a little bit like I thought that series might look. Like the Panthers were clearly more physical, more dominant on the puck, and Rangers gonna have to figure something out because I don't think them trying to play. They were trying to do a little too much like the Bruins, like getting picky with their shots, not just throwing pucks on net, they're gonna have to change, and they're gonna have to match some of Florida's physicality too. So, early thoughts on the Eastern Conference Finals there.
I mean, it looks a lot like Boston against the Panthers, right? I know. I mean, I also feel like I saw Razor tweet out, Bruins fans, what do you think of the Rangers putting up very little shots against the Bruins? Also put up very little shots against the Maple Leafs too. So it wasn't simply just Florida. But I do think that, look, Florida plays it's a big boy style of hockey. It's in your face and they wear you down. And literally to the final shift last night, they're up, a couple goals late, and Lomberg and Cousins and is it Steckland?
Stenlund.
Stenlund. They're running around finishing their checks. So yeah, I think the Rangers kind of got a bit of a wake up call.
Mikkola finished one on Hedl right at the buzzer.
Which I saw a lot of hate on that, and I think was it Ty Anderson tweeted that it's the second time that Mikkola has targeted a player with a concussion history in the final seconds. I mean, look, if I'm being honest, guys, I don't know if that's running through his head in that moment.
No.
So it's a little, but
I honestly didn't have a huge problem with it.
Me neither. It's to me, it was the game.
Yeah, it was playing to the buzzer. Is it annoying? Yeah, if you're the Rangers, do you probably want to respond somehow? Sure, but I didn't think it was dirty.
You're sending a message. There's nothing wrong with that. So look, I think the Rangers they're in for a series. They realized last night you're gonna have to do a hell of a lot more if you want to beat the Florida Panthers in a 7-game series. So Florida looks like they're rolling. A lot's going their way, but they're earning their bounces, and they're going to be a tough out for the Rangers if they don't really kind of pick up the pace a bit.
Yeah, Scott was the only one of us that picked Florida, right? Brian, you picked the Rangers too? I thought it was going to. I thought Rangers. And obviously, we're 1 game in, so it's still so far away from being decided.
I just didn't think that the Bruins. Who did Florida have in round 1? Tampa. I don't think the Bruins really offered. See, Tampa didn't offer a ton of depth. Boston didn't offer a ton of high-end talent outside of Pastrnak, really. I mean, at this stage of Marchand's career, he's not elite. McAvoy was struggling.
And he was out for a little bit. So
I think the Bruins kind of gave the Panthers a good fight, and I just think that the Rangers kind of have it all. They have the depth and the high-end talent. And I don't think the Panthers have really had to face a team with all of that just yet. So that's why I was thinking the Rangers. But I mean, if it's going to look like it did in Game 1, I mean, Florida's going to walk their way to the Stanley Cup Finals for the 2nd straight year.
Well, the Bruins look like they were going to do that in Game 1 versus Florida too. So didn't necessarily play out that way.
That's true. You're right, Bridget. That's true. Scott, do you have any thoughts on Game 1? It's not going to be that easy for Florida the whole series, we don't think.
No,
right?
no. I mean, the Rangers will adjust. They'll have a response, I'm sure. Maybe they'll throw Matt Rempe in and he'll run someone. But it did, Game 1 did look like why I had concerns about the Rangers in this series. And that's not to say those are going to continue every game, but that went kind of what I thought. I thought the Rangers were, after coming off 2 not as physical series, I thought they were going to be in for a little bit of a rude awakening facing the Panthers, and I think they kind of got that wake up call. So let's see how they respond to it.
All right. Well, Bridget and Scott, I hope you guys have a great Memorial Day weekend. Mm-hmm. And to all of our listeners, be safe.
By the way, we are going to do a mailbag next week. So people can send us questions on YouTube, on Twitter, at the Skate Pod, by email. skatepod@weei.com. So we haven't finalized the day yet. It's not going to be Monday. That's a holiday. But some point next week, we will be doing a mailbag.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. So with that said, thank you all very much for listening. Have a great weekend. Be safe, and we'll talk to you next week. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
not in front of a screen, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.